Grace, mercy, and peace from our Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen. Welcome. Welcome. We throw that word out all the time, don't we? Especially in church, especially when we sing, especially when we hear the gospel being proclaimed, because it is something that welcomes other people to participate in that. Yeah, the word welcome really used to be spelled with two L's, because it meant welcome. You have come into my life. You have come somewhere that you weren't before. You have journeyed somewhere and you are here. And so now we are welcoming. It's not just saying hi, good morning. Like I walk on the Highline Trail up in Littleton every morning to do 3 miles. Like this morning, I did it at 5:30 in the morning. People are not real welcoming at that time of the day. Conversations are not happening on the Highline Trail. Let me just tell you, if you get a grunt out of somebody, you're doing pretty darn good, When we have people over at our house and they step to our front porch, do we have anything there? Sometimes a welcome mat. Here's some welcome mats that I think you probably would like to have, just thinking. One mat says this: welcome-ish. Depends on who you are and how long you're going to stay. Now, wouldn't that be a nice way to welcome people? Another one says, cute shoes. Now take them off. Ooh. This one is for some people, I know. Cats welcome, people tolerated. Another one, I'm fair on both sides here. No need to knock. The dogs already let us know that you're here. Final one. Unless you have tacos, coffee, Girl Scout cookies, or my Amazon package, go away. Welcoming. We're called to welcome, aren't we? Later on, as we go through Matthew, we're going to come up to Matthew 25, but I just want to go through Matthew 25 because this is where we get it from. Remember these words. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you... Okay, let's do that again. I was a stranger and you... I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick and in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, the members of my family, you did it to me. You see, welcoming is just critically important. It's an important part of our DNA as Christians, as human beings, I think, to some degree. But as Christians, we want to welcome people. And I always believe, and I've been trying to parse this through this whole week, been thinking about this, what is the difference between welcoming people? And I think when we welcome people, we are realizing that they are coming from someplace else and coming into a new place. Like, what was it, the Prairie Home Companion? What did he always say? Welcome to Lake Wobegon, right? Home of the women who are strong, the men who are good looking. Come on now, we're stretching this out a little bit. And the children who are, there we go. We got the children at least. We kind of murdered the first two. So we even in things like that. But when we go on a boat, we go on a ship, right? There's usually a welcome. We get on a plane, there's usually a welcome because you're in a new environment. When we are welcomed, we are stepping into a different environment than where we came from. That's just the nature of the beast. And so we have a responsibility, therefore, of doing what we've been talking about the last 2 weeks in Matthew, of being ambassadors of Jesus Christ. And ambassadors mean that we're in a different place, right? A different country. We're representing something that is not here if we're an ambassador. If you're the ambassador from the United States, you represent the United States wherever you go. Did you know that there's over 1 million U.S. citizens that live in other countries? And they're all ambassadors to some capacity. They all represent their homeland. When we lived in 5 other different countries, we knew when people looked at us that they were evaluating us on us being Americans. And that carries a lot of weight, good and bad, depending on where you are in the world and how that is. We've talked about that. We are ambassadors. We're in this new kingdom. So we have this job of welcoming people. One of the questions I would ask you today is, when have you been welcomed? At a time when you were surprised? When have you been welcomed? Yeah. You've been welcomed here, haven't you, Ron? Yeah. Yeah, we welcome people. We welcome people into a new place, a new time. I know that when we took our calls overseas, that oftentimes we were very much welcomed when we got there. One was overseas, but it was still in the United States. When we went to Hawaii, Michael, when we went there and had the aloha, the welcome, there's a picture of me somewhere when I took the call in Kona, and all the members of the church came to the airport to welcome me, and they all brought a lei. And literally, I had to push them down to breathe. I probably had at least 50 leis on me, and I had to push them down to breathe. But it was a great picture. Then I'd say, take a picture of me, I'm going to let it go. And I'd let it go, and they'd all fluff up there, I know he's there somewhere, But it was so welcoming, How do we welcome people? What are our symbols of welcoming people into our families, into our circle of friends? When do we see people outside and try to integrate them and try to bring them inside? Yeah, I think too, when we went to Tokyo, Japan, we were welcomed. I went over before my wife came over. We had our middle daughter got married in about 3 days of me flying over there. So my wife stayed home to take care of her in her first week of being married. And I got over there, and instantly when we got at Narita Airport in Tokyo is about 70 miles outside of Tokyo, and they had a rental car there that they had rented, and 2 people from the church there picked me up, took me to the church house, and which was good because I would never be able to find it, of course. Tokyo, the small city of 32 million at the time, now it's 35 million. Yeah. And so when I got to the house and went in there, here was this bouquet of beautiful flowers. Probably cost a couple $100 in Japan. Probably did. And everything was stocked. Everything was stocked, including shampoos and toiletries in the bathroom and everything like that. They knew how to welcome, and yet they hadn't had a new pastor for 8 years. But they all knew, because they were living in another place, they all knew the value of doing that. I was thinking, you're going to be welcoming a new pastor here someday, right, Mel? Come on. You're going to tell them afterwards. You're going to tell them something afterwards, aren't you? Okay, there we go. I was just thinking, though, what an opportunity to welcome this person into this community. How are you going to do that? What are going to be your symbols of welcoming? Because I think, you only have one chance for the first start. You only have one chance for that first impression, right? And really need to make it a good one. Need to do a good job on that. Used to be that in the old farming communities, when the pastor would come in, they would throw a pound party or whatever it is. They would a pound of sugar, a pound of butter, whatever it is, so that when you came into the house, there was a lot there. You wouldn't have to buy a lot of groceries for the first few weeks. And I just think we need to do a good job always of welcoming people, because this is what we're called to do. But even welcoming the pastor, not assuming. I was just thinking, because again, I've been doing this welcome throughout this whole week, trying to parse this word. What does it mean to welcome someone? And I was thinking, why don't you guys, just a suggestion, get a gift card for your favorite restaurant in Castle Rock. Get 2 of them so that they can go with somebody else and not you. Seriously. But wouldn't it be nice to know what are the great restaurants in Castle Rock or something like that? It's just so little touches like that could make such a big difference in how we welcome people. We know that the cross is a big plus button because it says humanity plus God. That's what the incarnation is all about. Jesus Christ coming into our world to show us, to welcome us into this new kingdom, as he was trying to tell his disciples all the time about this new kingdom. And sometimes it confused them a little bit because it's not always the way the world works. Because Jesus valued people that the world was throwing under the bus, literally. And they didn't even have buses back then. Call it a good chariot or two, right? They didn't, that was the case. That's who Jesus was constantly welcoming, with the sinners, the prostitutes, the tax collectors. Remember, we're in the gospel of what? And Matthew was a? Okay, well, there's a little history there, right, of being accepted. It's vitally important that we learn to do welcoming as well as we can throughout our life. I'll leave you with this story. I'll try to. When we were called back to Bratislava, Slovakia, we knew that there was a problem. This was 2015. And this was when Syria was getting bombing themselves, the civil war in Syria. There was literally millions of people that were leaving Syria to go to Turkey, to go to Jordan, to go to Lebanon, and to come to Europe. Because Angela Merkel, remember her? Yeah, she was a good PK. Did you know that? T.O., I'm sorry. I correct myself. Her father was a Lutheran pastor in East Germany. And she, I think, had good intentions when she said, why don't you just come to Germany and we'll put you to work. You can come here and live. Because Germany had a history of that, did they not? With the Turkish people that came 20, 25 years ago. Well, it's longer than that. My gosh, I'm dating myself now. But 30, 40 years ago. And so they had a reputation of doing this. So the trouble was they had to go from Syria through all these bad places to come to Europe. After church one Sunday, by the way, about 3 weeks before this there was a refrigerated chicken truck that was on the A4 just east of Vienna, and they opened it up. They found 80 bodies inside. No air conditioning. It was hot. They suffocated to death. This is the same area. We went after church. We went to the border between Hungary and Austria. Nickelsdorf in Austria and Haggai Shalom, obviously an old Jewish town in Hungary. There wasn't any Jews anymore. Something happened called World War II. And the Jews, there's still some synagogues in that area, but there's nobody to attend to them. So we're in this area and there's guard posts because this used to be the border between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, Austria and Hungary. They brought in 4,000 people on the train that day. They packed them in at the Serbian border, took them across Hungary. They had no bathrooms. They locked all the bathrooms. The Hungarians are beautiful people. Their government is not too good. And the Lutheran church over there has done a great job of receiving refugees. So they got off the train, 4,000. They had to walk about 4 or 5 kilometers, about 2.5 miles from one border into Austria. They got off there. It was one of those crappy, poor weather days there, windy, rainy. It was hard on them. A lot of these people had been wet a couple times. And they got off, and we were there to welcome them to a place they had never been before, but a place, Europe at least, where it was going to be their new home. They've lost everything. They've lost their family, their friends, their homeland. They're going to probably be buried in another country that they never saw coming. A lot of really deep things going on. We welcomed them there. And as they came through, the first people that came through were the runners, because they were the young people. They were strong enough. They could run. So they ran through, and we were told, if you have food, which we did, hold it back a little bit, because the runners will come through, and they're in pretty good shape. But at the end of the line, it's not going to be that way. So for hours upon hours, we see this trail of people coming through there, and it progressively gets worse until you get to the families, until you get to people with crutches and wheelchairs, and they had to rely on other people to push them. And so we were welcoming them, and we were giving them things and all kind of, we had drinks and pouches and stuff, and toiletries, and we had all kind of stuff, and we had cheese. We'd bought some big chubs of cheese, and we had bread, and we were giving them cheese and bread. And we kept on going, but at the time, we only thought we were going to have about 2,000 people come through, but they had doubled up the trains that day, so there was 4,000. And so everybody, all these other NGOs were running out of food as well. And we were running out of food, and we still saw people coming. And I can't tell you how that rips your heart. When you're there and you look into their eyes, and when you look into their eyes and you see this hollowness that you saw in concentration camp pictures, because these people are traumatized out of their minds, out of their minds. And many of them were crying. One of them came up and had their handy, their cell phone, and held it up, and it had the zip code for Vienna, Austria on it, because I lived in Vienna, so I knew the zip code. And when I said, there, right across the border. Yeah. So we ran out of food. And we had this table, and there's 4 of us there, my intern, her husband, my wife, and I. We were all on 4 corners of this, and we looked underneath there, and we know it was not there before, and I cannot explain it. Another chub of 300 pieces of cheese. We just slapped it in their hands as they came by, first with bread, and then afterwards just the cheese slices, if you want to call it cheese. It's a stretch, I know. It was their protein for that day. We got done. They were all gone. We looked at each other. We were just spent, absolutely spent. We get into our car. I'm driving. It's a Skoda, 3-cylinder, 5-speed. Great car. Those Czechs, they know how to build cars. Let me tell you what. It was built for Eastern Europe, because it could hit a pothole, and it's smaller than a Volkswagen Rabbit. And there's 4 of us in there, and all these supplies stacked on top of the 2 people in the back seat. But on the way back, we didn't have it. We will go back, and it's at nighttime. We couldn't talk to each other. All we could do was to scrape the cheese out from our fingernails. I tell you the story because it's a welcome story. How do we welcome others? How do we welcome the stranger? How do we welcome the outcast? How do we welcome the ones that aren't fitting into society, the foster children, others? How we welcome is our DNA to this world, how we bring in God's kingdom. For the opportunity to welcome everywhere we go, we can truly say, thanks be to God.